Howdy, and welcome to Texas A&M's Campus Sustainability Month, our virtual offerings for 2022. Really happy that you're here with us today, that you decided to take some time out of your lunch break this Friday to join us. We have a really interesting presentation today. We're going to be looking at racism in the media. And one thing I just want to point out when we're thinking about the word racism is we're not necessarily looking at like individual prejudices or individual discrimination. But more looking at this from a structural point of view. How is this happening systematically through our institutions, and particularly through the media and Hollywood and things like that? So it's going to be a really interesting presentation that I'm definitely looking forward to. We have Maci and Delia. They're two of our TAMU sustainability interns that are going to be presenting. And we're going to get to that in just a second, because as this is part of Campus Virtual Earth Month, I just have a few things I just want to go over quickly before we get started. So first things first. I would recommend that you put your presentation in side-by-side mode. In your view options in the top right corner, you can do that. That way you can see the speakers, camera, and you can see the presentation at the same time. Also, the live transcript is turned on here, so you can check out the transcripts or the subtitles if you need to. I also really encourage you to ask questions in the chat. At the very end, we'll have a chance for discussion. It'll really help us have a more robust discussion if you ask some questions. This is being recorded. This will be on YouTube after the fact as well. And we are giving away prizes. So once again, we're going to be having code words, and one code word is going to give you one entry into our random draw giveaway. And this code word will be written on one of the PowerPoint slides. It could be spoken, or I might drop it in the chat. And during this live event, there's going to be 5 code words that you can access. And there'll only one of those will be available when you watch it on YouTube as a recording. So being here live is a bonus. And then you keep track of all of your code words. You're going to submit them all in one email to sustainability@tamu.edu. The last day you have to do that is at the end of the month on Halloween, 10/31/2022 at 5 p.m. And this is a link with all of the information. There's all the different ways you can collect code words and get entries into the drawing. There's lots of different options. And here are the prizes. We have some really cool prizes. We have a 1 tier 1 winner. There could be 2 tier 2 winners and 5 tier 3 winners. Some highlights, I know people are really eyeing that Squishmallow, something nice and fluffy you can squeeze. You could also get a hammock. You could get a year with a Vail Ride subscription. You could also get a full moon dinner to Ronin. So just lots of cool options. You could also get like a comforter for your bed, a Yeti cooler. So, you know, those are just different ways you can participate in the event. And then the final thing I want to point out is that you can also double up and you can utilize the Maroon-based app. You have to make sure that if you're using this, make sure to check in and sign into your event, but you can actually win like cash prizes and gift cards and things like that. And this is something that's for all kinds of events on campus, not just this one. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Delia and Maci, and they're going to kick us off. So ladies, you can share your screen whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, hello, my name is Delia. I'm an environmental studies major here at A&M.
My name is Maci, Konen, and I'm a biology major here at A&M.
So our presentation is Get Out, Under and Overrepresented Groups in Film. So content and significance. In this presentation, we're going to be talking about every part of film. In the film industry, we're going to be talking about how movies are made and how every single step is dominated by white people. And we're going to talk about the importance of this because it's really important to consume media consciously. So first, we're going to go in behind the scenes. This is where a lot of the decisions happen, and this first begins at film companies. There are 25 people who run the top Hollywood networks here in the United States, and only 3 of them are women of color, 2 of which are Black, and 1 of which is Hispanic. And this is a big deal because these are the people who decide where the budgets go, what type of media we're consuming, and the majority of these people are white men, which means that a lot of our media is from that of a white male gaze. And that leads into directors. So this is a graph on the directors' race and the percentage of directors that are either white or from minorities. In this presentation, minorities are defined by people of color. So this is Black, Latino, Native American, Asian, and Middle Eastern, and other also multiracial and Native American people. The light blue line right here is the percentage of white people. The gray line is the percentage of the minority population here in the United States. And the dark blue line is the percentage of actual minority directors. And so there has been major improvement since 2011. 2011, the percentage of minority directors was at 12.2%, and that has tripled since then at 30.2%. But to actually properly reflect the population of people of color here in the US, that percentage needs to increase by 12%. But there have been major improvements. But the race of the directors actually greatly impacts the amount of money they get. And that's what's going on in this slide. On the left, we have the budgets of minority film directors, and on the right, we have the budgets of white directors. And what we can see here is that literally 67% of minority film directors are given less than $20 million for their films, which is in stark comparison with the around 50% that white people get. So minority film directors are a lot more likely to get less of a much smaller budget than that of a white director. And once again, this goes back to the film companies. This goes back to the fact that film companies are dominated by white men. And because of that, a director is a lot more likely to get less money if they're a minority. And this is also, this year more than last year, there's been a correlation between directors that are people of color getting less money and the leads. So a person of color who is a director and has a white lead for their film is still 60% less likely to get money than a white director with a person of color as a lead. And that also goes into casting. Less than half of films directed by white males in 2021 had casts that were 30% minority or less. So that's what this graphic here is showing. So it was, this is actually an improvement from 2020, when more than half of the films directed by white males had casts that were 30% minority or less. So that's what this is showing right here, the highlighted portions. And there are a lot more women in the cast of white males, but this pales in comparison to that of directors of color. More than 3/4 of films directed by people of color in 2021 featured casts that were greater than 30% minority, actually reaching 78.9% of their casts being 31% or more, which accurately represents the population. And on top of that, 60.5% of the films made by directors of color actually have over 50% of a minority cast, which just goes to show that directors of color will actually hire minorities to be a part of their films, which is a better step towards more diversity and to better represent the US population. And that leads into lead actors. This is a very similar graphic to the one on directors earlier. The light blue line represents white people, gray line represents the US population, and dark blue line represents minority population. And for the first time ever in 2020, there was an almost accurate representation of minority leads here in the US. Those numbers did go down. And on top of that, the percentage of minorities in the US also went up. So although it decreased, it does look like there is going to be a trend towards more lead actors being minorities. And here's just a breakdown of these film leads between 2020 and 2021. Both years, white actors are around the same, but among the different racial and ethnic groups here in the US, the numbers did change substantially. So in 2020, the film leads for Black people was 19%. Now it's 15.5%. Latinx went up 2%. Asian stayed about the same. Multi-ethnic people went up a lot. Native American went down significantly. I think that there was only one lead this past year, this past movie cycle, that was Native American, and there were no Middle Eastern or North African representation this year in film for the US. Now our one of our code words is costume. We're going to go into costume and set design. We're going to be focusing on two costume designers. We have Bina Dagler and Ruthie Carter, both of which have won awards for their work. And so Bina Dagler was the costume designer for Mulan. Her inspiration that she discussed during the process of creating Mulan, she went to museums in Europe and looked at the Chinese departments for her inspiration. For a little bit of like historical and cultural context, Mulan, it takes place during a specific time in Chinese history. And she based most of her designs off of the Tang Dynasty, which isn't actually the period of time in which Mulan takes place. And even then, she was not loyal to the Tang Dynasty. So this is, on the left is a picture of the makeup and dress that she chose for the actual movie. And on the right is a more historically accurate style for the makeup. The lip style is completely different, as are the eyebrows and some of the blush placement, as well as the forehead makeup. And she also was not loyal to the actual dress style of the Tang Dynasty. She chose a lot of different time periods and implemented them to make it more appealing towards a Western gaze. And this was, and because the historical accuracy and just like they didn't really stay true to the folktale itself, Disney did lose $140 million because people in China and also Chinese Americans here in the US, these images can cause like almost a dissonance because they just don't actually stay accurate to the folktale itself. And that leads into Ruth E. Carter. Ruth E. Carter was the costume designer for Black Panther, and her inspiration, she took a lot of designs from South Africa. She contacted artisans there, and she really emphasized on wanting to use the materials and the designs that are already from different countries in Southern Africa. And because of that, she got a lot more of an authentic look. Although Black Panther does allow for some creativity because Wakanda is a futuristic country, she did stay relatively true to the materials and the styles that might have actually been implemented if there were a country like Wakanda. In the world on the left, her costume does have almost like a chevron-like pattern, and this is to allude kind of to the traditional artwork that is commonly found in Southern Africa. And then the materials in the Queen's outfit are used from like materials that are commonly found in those regions of Africa. So because of that, Ruthie Carter did win an award for her costume design in Black Panther. And that just goes to show how important it is to hire people who are going to be culturally conscious of things. And then we go into editing. It is so, cinematography and just editing is so important in filmmaking. Film was developed for lighter skin tones historically, And the switch was only made when wood furniture companies complained that film was not accurately depicting the different shades of varnish that wood provided. So it was not an incentive to be more inclusive, but rather one out of necessity for advertisement. Luckily, digital photography does also allow for more diversity. So this is a scene from a recently released HBO series called Insecure. And this cinematographer used different lighting using the reflection of lights to better highlight the darker skin tones of the actors in this film. And a lot of different filmmakers are trying to go more in depth with this and figure out ways that make darker skin tones look just as beautiful in film as well.
Okay. Oh, sorry. For the next portion of the presentation, we're going to be focusing on a handful of films, and we'll be looking at the poor representation of minority groups as well as the representation that is done in accurate ways. So the first group we'll be looking at is Asian Americans. The first two examples are Breakfast at Tiffany's and 16 Candles. So in the movie Breakfast at Tiffany's, this character is Mr. Yunioshi, and he is a Japanese man played by a white man. This is also known as yellowface. And in the movie, he has exaggerated narrow eyes. He has buck teeth that are so obviously fake, just to make fun of the Japanese look that people have. And then in the movie 16 Candles, this is the character Long Duk Dong, and throughout the entire movie he is seen as a joke. Every time that he comes onto the screen, they play a gong sound, and he's just seen as a joke for the entire movie. So in both of these movies, the Asian character speaks in broken English and is portrayed as idiotic and clueless. And this just contributes to the harmful stereotypes that Asian Americans experience in the film industry. So Mulan was supposed to be a movie that celebrates Chinese culture, but it was a major flop, mostly because it was created by white people. And as Delia mentioned earlier, it was not culturally or historically correct. Anyone of Asian descent can easily see that the movie is not a true portrayal of Chinese culture. And the movie is a major missed opportunity to make up for the animated film's poorly taken debut in China. The creators had a chance to showcase Chinese culture, but they really missed the mark. So now on to some better examples of Asian American representation. We have Bao, which is a short film, and Crazy Rich Asians. They are both created by people of Asian descent. The short film Bao was made by a Chinese woman, and she used her culture and her past to pull it from her experiences to make the short film. And she uses Chinese culture to explain the relationship between a mother and her son. And the short film was just very culturally accurate. And because of her hard work, she was able to win an Academy Award for Best Short Film. And then the movie Crazy Rich Asians was directed and created by an Asian American man. The cast is full of Asian characters, and they're all well-rounded and not jokes as we've seen in these other movies. And even though some people argue that the movie is not Asian enough, it is still something that should be celebrated because it is the first all-Asian cast in 25 years. Okay, next up is the Latin American community. So the movies Spanglish and West Side Story both portray common stereotypes of the Latin American community. Spanglish is a movie about a Hispanic woman that works with a white family. Her character speaks in broken English, and she's portrayed as stupid and clueless. And the whole point of her character is to cater to the white family. And then in the movie West Side Story, there are many of Puerto Rican characters, and they're made out to be the bad guys. They're viewed as dangerous and violent gang members that can't be trusted. They're always trying to fight with or harm the white people in the movie. And stereotypes such as this one are extremely harmful to the Latin American community because they're portrayed inaccurately. And if someone has never interacted with a Latin American person, then all they have is this view of them being violent and dangerous. So that can add to ignorance. So next up, these are the better representations. Coco is an animated movie about Mexican culture, and it's a good representation of Dia de los Muertos traditions, and it is obvious that it is made respectfully and with the appreciation of the rich Hispanic culture. The creators brought in people to educate themselves about Hispanic family dynamics and the culture to ensure that they would not revert to harmful stereotypes. It has a diverse cast of voice actors, and it's a great way to introduce children and adults alike to a culture that they're not a part of. Selena is a movie about the life of Selena Perez. She's a famous Mexican-American singer. The cast is full of Latin American actors, and they accurately tell the story of her life in a respectful way. Her story is not watered down or whitewashed, which is often seen in other movies recounting history of minorities. So the next group is African Americans. So both of these movies, The Help and The Green Book, were written by and directed by white people. They're supposed to be recounts of history, but they just fail at that task completely. In The Help, the true horrors that Black women experience are kind of watered down and whitewashed because they're told through the eye of a white woman. The movie is a fantasized version of segregation, and that's because it's been manipulated by white people. But since it's such a popular movie, people often look to it to educate themselves on racism. And this is an issue because people are not getting an accurate representation of the Black experience from this horrific time period. And then in the movie The Green Book, there are many various issues. First off, it is named after the Negro motorist Green Book, which is a book that was written in between the 1930s and 60s and was commonly updated to inform Black travelers on safe hotels, restaurants, and to warn them of sundown towns to keep them safe while traveling during the Jim Crow era. And this piece of history is never even mentioned in the movie, even though it's named after that book. And then there are many other aspects of the movie that are not accurate. The two characters are portrayed as really good friends when in actuality, they just had a regular employer-employee relationship. And the Black character, Don Shirley, he is shown as disconnected from his family in the Black community, which his family even spoke out and said that that was wrong and that they portrayed him in the wrong way and show their disdain for the movie. Even though he is a famous musician and the story should have been about him, they really focused on how he educated and helped the white man through his prejudices. So basically just focusing on the white character's development rather than his Black experience. And this movie actually won an Oscar for Best Picture, which just goes to show the people that are choosing who wins Oscars are not culturally aware of what's happening. And both of these movies have been said to spoon feed racism to white people. They're movies that portray the Black experience from a really dark time in history, but it just kind of waters down and glosses over what actually happened. Next, this is The Hate U Give. It was originally a book written by a Black woman. It was turned into a movie and directed by a Black man. So first off, it has a very diverse cast. And one of the things that is great about this movie is that it tackles racism as a current topic rather than focusing on it as something in the past. And it also shows how Black communities are affected by police violence rather than focusing on the violence itself. It shows how they deal with it and just all the horrors that they experience. And it's been said to show the humanity behind the headlines, which basically means it's giving a story and a face to what's happening rather than just seeing, oh, this happened in the news. And then lastly, we have the movie Us. It's a horror movie that was directed by a Black man and has a Black family as the main characters. This movie is great because it's centered around Black people, but it's not focused on racism. So therefore it's pure representation. And it's also nice to see how far movies have come, because in older horror movies, it was common for the one Black character to be killed off first. Now to the Oscars. So the Academy is made up of tons of white men and women, and they dominate the film industry because they get to determine which movies get recognition. So whenever white men and women are choosing which movies get a prestigious award, it just continues the cycle because they're not choosing minority groups. And also the demographics of the Academy are not fully shared. So the lack of diversity kind of goes under the radar because no one really knows who's all a part of it. And it just allows the cycle to continue. And that's why there's a history of nominees and winners being mostly white. So on to Oscar winners. These are Oscar winners by director race. So on the top we have the white people, I'm sorry, and on the bottom we have the minority directors. And it has improved dramatically, but you can see that in the past it was not too good. And we can always see, like, in the future, is it just a trend, or are we going to continue to see more representation in the Oscars? And this is Oscar winners by the lead actor race. Once again, we have the white lead actors on the top and the minority actors on the bottom. And the trend is obviously moving up, but at the same time, it goes down dramatically at points too. So even though we are at a high point right now, it could possibly go down in the future.
And that leads into our takeaways. It's so important to consume film consciously and to support minority films, because it's important to show these big companies that, like, films that have people of color are successful. And although it's important to understand that the situation has gotten a lot better in recent years, there is still room for growth. Pointing out the fact that in 2019, there were no Oscar winners that were people of color, just showing that although we have gotten a lot further, there is still room to grow. And that concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for listening.
Yes, thank you.
All right, great. Delia, Maci, thank you so much. That was really a phenomenal job. I personally learned a lot. I really appreciated how you showed us kind of the background, setting the stage of what's happening. But then you also showed us, some examples that I can actually see, when I watch a movie. So hopefully this can help all of us, when we're actually consuming film, just think a little bit deeper about what we're watching, who was making the decisions, and kind of how characters are being portrayed. I think it's really important. And this is a chance for all of y'all to ask questions right now. If you have questions you want to ask, please do. I have one question that I want to get us started off with. I just want to talk a little bit more about, you showed us a stat where we've seen a lot of improvement, where we have a lot more lead actors that is a person of color. It's gone up quite a bit in the last couple of years. And you also showed us that in terms of directors and even winning some awards in Hollywood. And this has all happened very recently in the last couple of years. So I guess my first question would be, does this feel like a moment in time, or does it feel more of a movement of consistent change, I guess, is my first question.
So just basing everything on stats, I do think this is going to be consistent change, because a lot of these movies, like Everywhere, Everything All at Once, that's the first thing that popped up in my head. Us, all these movies, they are showing big film companies that movies that have a full cast of people of color, movies that talk about people of color's ethnic experiences here in the US do very well, and they make a lot of money, and and they do win awards. And so I do think that this is going to continue to be a trend in the film industry.
All right, and then a follow-up question would be, so we have seen a dramatic increase in lead actors and things like that, but does that necessarily mean that we're not going to be creating racist media going forward? even though we have, lead actors of color in these roles, can we still, is it still possible that we would still create kind of racist media out of it?
I think that it definitely is still possible to get racist media, even though we do have lead actors that are from minority groups. As like I said about like The Help and The Green Book and some of the other movies, they are created by white people about a minority experience that they have no clue about. So even though there are minority characters at the forefront of the movie, they're still not being represented in the correct lighting. So
Yeah, and as you say that, it makes me think too about something you said, Maci. You said the humanity behind the headlines, and that really stuck with me because that is like an example of, I guess, some like a representation rather than appropriation. And you also just mentioned that it's not focused on racism like the movie Us. Like when we're often creating cinema around different characters of color, we're often putting them in like a certain situation or a certain time period or from a certain point of view. And it's not, and we don't always have to focus on that racism. It's that humanity that's much more important. And that's how you can create really good media. And I don't know if there's not really a question there, but you can, if you want to say more about that, you can, but that just really stuck with me, that point you made.
Yeah, and I think that's like more on the representation side of things, because I was reading about the Academy, and it was saying that the older white men were interested in movies like 12 Years a Slave, I think that's the name of it, and like movies that are focused kind of on racism in the past, and they're not interested in the current minority experience. So just like being able to see that and see representation is really cool.
Yeah, and like we don't always have to focus on like the negative, like we can focus on joy and things like that too, so we can kind of show a full experience of life. So yeah, that's really cool. So those are I guess if anyone else doesn't have any questions, we are kind of running over time here. So I think we'll call that a day. But before I have y'all go, let me just quickly share something on my screen. I want to let you know what we have coming up next. So this is happening on Monday. We're going to be talking about water disparities around the globe. Adrian and Claudia will be talking with that. It's going to actually, sorry, Tuesday, October 18th at 1 p.m. So please join us for that as well. And just one last time, Delia and Maci, thank you all so much. Y'all did such a great job and appreciate everything that you taught us today. Hope y'all have a great day. We hope to see you on Tuesday and at the rest of our events. And then Wednesday is Campus Sustainability Day. So be there at Rudder Plaza 10 to 1. Thanks, y'all. Y'all have a great day.